I'm used to seeing Super Bowl champ opens the season. That's the way we do it. How do you read into the fact that they might decide to open with the Australia game instead?
Yeah, I think it's pretty funny and fitting for a team that probably is going to be one of the most disrespected Super Bowl winners in recent history. If you weren't bored by the game, then you were probably a Seahawks fan, I guess. So I think the team will probably enjoy the fact that there's a little disrespect. But to be totally honest, Mike McDonald and everyone in that locker room, for the most part, just doesn't care. Like they don't pay attention to that stuff. And I think Seahawks fans definitely will, though.
I mean, I think the theme of that team is "We do not care," and that is also part of the title of your brand new book. Quote: "We did not care how the Seattle Seahawks silenced all doubts and became champions." Congratulations on the book. Congratulations on the
Thank
Super
you.
Bowl. Incredibly exciting time in your life. So, give us a little bit of background. What prompted you to write the book?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was not something I was considering doing, but I was approached by a publisher and they were like, "Hey, let's see if we can get something done." And all you have to do is stay until like 1 in the morning at the stadium to to finish writing your game story so we can get this thing published within a week. And yeah, I was the last person there. Like, turned the lights off on me as I was leaving Levi Stadium and had to shimmy my way between some locked gates to get out of there. But it was great, and the response has been fantastic. And honestly, this has just been a very easy team, easy organization to write about because I think Mike McDonald, John Schneider did it in a really unique way. The amount of low ego that's in that locker room and that organization for a sport and a profession that is full of egos, I think is really remarkable. And so being able to kind of tell their story and share it with as folks, I think is a pleasure. And so far, people seem to really be liking it.
Brian, I was swaggy walking through this all off season because on this show I was very early on the Seahawks going to win the Super Bowl train. I'm just going to be honest. I was all in on this thing.
That's
When did
great.
you covering this team incredibly closely? When did you realize no, this is not the Sam Darnold of old. This is not the Seahawks deserve a different level of respect than they're getting.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, this has kind of been, if you're a Harry Potter fan, it's kind of been the sorting hat season for the Seahawks. Like, are you someone who knows football or not? For me, I called it the MacGyver or MacGruber off season for John Schneider. Either it was going to blow up or it was going to save the day. And so I kind of, for me, I think the moment that I really started to think this team was going to win the Super Bowl was after they beat the Houston Texans. Honestly, that was early on in the season where they were going to face the best defense that they'd faced, a defense that seemed custom tailored to be able to slow down that offense. Great play action, great under center defense, and also great cornerbacks to slow down JSN. And the Seahawks hung 27 on them. And honestly, without a missed field goal and maybe a Cooper Kupp interception, they probably would have had more than that in that game. And so I kind of thought if that defense wasn't going to be able to slow them down, their own defense was certainly going to slow others down enough to win. And then obviously, once they secured the number one seed in week 18, I think that's the point where every other Seahawks fan kind of started to realize, all right, this actually might happen because the honest truth is, it took a while for a lot of people in the Seahawks fan base to truly believe that the team and Sam Darnold were capable of lifting the Lombardi trophy. And so, the loss to the Rams in week 11 was a big setback for a lot of people's confidence. And the only way that they could really overcome that was to start beating rivals like the 49ers and then eventually having to do it against the Rams for what was the second time in 3 games.
And look, I know you and Seahawks fans everywhere are still living on cloud nine, still living in a championship bubble, and you should. You should be living in that bubble forever and ever and always. But without sports, there would be no next season. So let's look ahead to next season. Klint Kubiak takes the job with the Raiders, and Brian Fleury takes over as the offensive coordinator. That's the unique thing about the Seahawks team is Mike McDonald's going to have total and complete ownership of the defense. So the offensive coordinator needs to have total and complete ownership of that side of the ball. Trust level that Brian Fleury can do that, and concern level that there might be some drop off losing Klint Kubiak.
Yeah, I'd be lying, Caroline, if I said I was, deep into my Brian Fleury knowledge. I've even reached out to people in the 40 around the 49ers organization that cover the team. I've talked to people around the NFL that know coaches and coaching staff. There's not a lot of information about Brian Fleury. And I think where I think most people have to start is just Mike Macdonald's judgment. And while some people would say, hey, well, the first OC he hired was Ryan Grubb, and that didn't work out. It was a very unique situation, very late in the process, and he kind of had to take a trust fall with a guy that John Schneider knew a little bit in Ryan Grubb. His last hire with Klint Kubiak obviously worked out pretty well, and that was really his first chance to go through the process. Now he knows what his offensive identity is. He knows what he's looking for. They've built a roster around that type of offense. Outside zone, you've got Gray Zabel and Jalen Sandell and some of these lighter, quicker, faster offensive linemen. And so bringing someone in that's from that same tree, Mike Macdonald knows what he's looking for. He clearly had internal candidates that he could have chosen. He ends up going external, which means Brian Fleury really knocked it out of the park in the interview. And also, I think a hidden benefit of this is the Seahawks don't have to promote someone internally and then find their replacement this late in the season. So you still have Justin Outen as a run game coordinator. You still have Jake Peetz as a pass game coordinator. You still have John Benton as the offensive line coach, and on and on. So I think there's a lot of stability in that staff. And the hope is Brian Fleury can combine all of that expertise into being a great play caller on game day.
Well, and look, at the end of the day, I say this all the time. When your team is great, you lose coordinators, you lose position coaches. This is just what's going to happen. So your hope is that you're doing this every single year, and the more time on task replacing guys, the better. That being said, Klint Kubiak is headed to my beloved Raiders. So give me the insight on this from your eyes, from what you've seen. What do you think, Klint Kubiak? When I say Klint Kubiak head coach, because it's such a different job than offensive coordinator, what do you say?
Yeah, first of all, really, really happy for Klint Kubiak to get this opportunity. He's a great guy. Nobody works harder. He's an absolute grinder, loves football, obviously grew up around football, around pro football at that. So he knows everything about what it means to be a head coach. That's not going to be new to him. It's not going to be a surprise. I think the real questions for Klint Kubiak are going to be, how does he command an entire room? As a guy that is definitely beloved by his players that have played for him, it's a little different when you're up there commanding the entire room and the entire roster and dealing with the interpersonal things that can come up and all those pieces. That's where I think there's some question about how Klint Kubiak will handle that. And to be honest, Mike Macdonald had some similar questions coming out of Baltimore. And it was a conversation with John Schneider where he decided to work with Michael Gervais, who is a performance psychologist, and really work on some of the EQ aspects of being a leader. That really was a big part of how the culture grew in his second season as head coach. So I think Klint Kubiak would be wise to kind of look in that same direction to kind of figure out not the X's and O's. I think he's got that down. But, how does he want the culture to form? How does he want that locker room to come together? I think those are probably the bigger questions. And the only other thing I'd say is I bet he expected to be able to bring more than Rick Dennison with him to Las Vegas. The fact that Mike Macdonald's managed to retain almost his entire staff, honestly, is a little bit of a surprise. So I think that's the other thing. He doesn't have all of the same, familiar faces around him that he was able to bring to Seattle.
Some coaching change at least, but also some changes on the roster as well. What are some position groups that you're looking at that absolutely positively need to be upgraded or overhauled this offseason?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know that you'd say like the 2025 Seahawks roster needs to be upgraded, right? But they have guys that are available that are going to potentially lead to some weak spots. I think cornerback is probably the place that you've got to look first, because when you've got Tariq Woolen and Josh Jobe, both free agents, both likely to command top dollar, if you don't sign either one of those, you're talking about getting down to Nehemiah Pritchett being your next starting cornerback on the outside. Obviously, Devin Witherspoon, Nick Eamon-Warrior are fantastic, but you need that third. So that's a big one. I think running back becomes a pretty important one. Obviously, Super Bowl MVP Kenneth Walker is a free agent. It sounds like they are not going to use the franchise tag on him. $14 million plus a year is probably not the spot that they want to start with that number. And you've got Zach Charbonnet, who tore an ACL late in the season. So he's not going to be available for a while. And you've got a lot of other names that are interesting, but not a clear starter. So I think that's another one. And I also would just give an eye to wide receiver. I think that even though you've got JSN, even though you've got Cooper Kupp, even though you've got Torrey Horton coming back from what was a very promising rookie year, you've got to wonder what happens with Rashid Shaheed. He played a huge role. Obviously, Klint Kubiak will probably be very eager to add him to the mix in Las Vegas. And if he does go, then you start getting into a pretty thin situation beyond those top three receivers. And so I don't know if you'll go into the free agent pool to look for a receiver, but that might be a place that you dip into the draft looking at that position.
You also have one of the better GMs in the NFL there, so I'm sure they can figure out. Schneider can figure some of this stuff out pretty easily. All right, but what about the eventual sale? Like this was, I think, rocked a lot of people maybe that hadn't paid attention that the Seahawks are about to be sold. The Allen estate dictates it. This was not a shock to Seattle, but how concerned are you about new ownership in the building?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Ownership sets the stage for everything that happens in an organization. And it depends on what kind of owner you're going to get. If you're going to get a hands-on owner who likes to think of himself or herself as a GM and involved in all the football decisions, that's probably not going to be a good thing because you've already got a GM who won Executive of the Year. You've got a coach who probably could have or should have won Coach of the Year, and they've won a Super Bowl. So part of what John Schneider has told me and others multiple times is whether it's Paul Allen or Jody Allen, they have allowed the football people in the organization to run it. And that's not the case in a lot of places. DeMarcus Lawrence can tell you a thing or two about that. So I think what you want to find is an owner who will come in and look to find ways that they can add to what's already working. That involves, there's no salary cap on coaches. There's no salary cap on scouting. If you want to add more scouts, if you want to add more to the analytics department, if you want to invest more in the facilities, anything that can make them find another edge to winning, that's how an owner can help. But if you've got billions of dollars, sometimes you've got specific ideas of what you want to be involved in. So we'll have to wait and see who ends up being the new head of the Seahawks.